Tonight, somewhere near you, someone will pour a drink and not think twice about it. A glass of wine after a long day. A beer at a game. A toast at a wedding, raised without a second thought. It feels modern, it feels social, it feels like something humans invented to unwind. But the real answer to why you drink is far stranger than any toast you've ever raised. Your taste for alcohol did not begin in a bar. It did not begin with a recipe. It began in the trees, millions of years before humans existed, written into your body before your body was even human. Here is where the story actually starts. About 10 million years ago, deep in the forests of what is now Africa, your ancestors were not walking upright. They were climbing. They spent their days eating fruit off branches, and some of that fruit had already begun to rot. Rotting fruit ferments. Fermentation produces ethanol. Ethanol is simply the chemical name for alcohol. So the fruit littering the forest floor, the fruit too soft and too ripe to matter to most animals, was already faintly alcoholic before any human hand ever touched it. A biologist named Robert Dudley at the University of California, Berkeley, has spent years studying this exact moment in your ancestry. He calls it the drunken monkey hypothesis. His idea is simple and a little unsettling. Your attraction to alcohol is not a modern flaw. It is an ancient survival tool. Here's how it worked. Ripe, fermenting fruit gave off a stronger smell than unripe fruit. That smell carried further through dense, tangled forest air. For a primate racing to find calories before a rival troop got there first, that smell was a signal worth chasing. Alcohol wasn't a vice back then. It was a beacon. It meant sugar. It meant energy. It meant food worth running toward. The primates who were drawn to that scent found more food, more often, and survived to pass on that same craving. The ones who ignored it simply went hungry more. Which means the craving sitting in you right now, the one that notices a drink across a room and leans toward it, might be older than your species itself. Isn't that strange to sit with for a moment? Now fast forward, millions of years pass. Your ancestors climb down from the trees. They stand upright. Their brains grow larger, their hands grow more precise, their groups grow more complex. And somewhere along that long climb, they stop finding alcohol by accident. They start making it on purpose. This is where the story turns from strange to almost unbelievable, because the evidence suggests your ancestors were brewing alcohol before they were farming wheat. In 2018, an archaeologist named Li Liu from Stanford University led a team examining stone mortars found in Rakefet Cave, in what is now Israel. The mortars belonged to the Natufians, a group of hunter-gatherers living roughly 13,000 years ago, well before agriculture existed anywhere on the planet. Inside those stone mortars, Liu's team found residue. Not bread residue, not porridge residue, beer residue. 13,000 years ago, before a single field had ever been deliberately planted, someone was soaking wild grain, letting it sprout, and brewing a drink that would have left them warm, loose, and a little unsteady on their feet. Sit with what that actually means. The invention of farming is usually taught as humanity's great turning point, the moment your ancestors stopped chasing food and started growing it instead. But if the Natufians were brewing beer before they were baking bread, then maybe the drive toward agriculture wasn't purely about survival. Maybe, in part, it was about wanting to keep drinking. A biomolecular archaeologist named Patrick McGovern from the University of Pennsylvania has spent decades chasing the same question from a different angle. He has chemically tested pottery shards from sites across the world and found traces of fermented beverages going back more than 9,000 years in places like Jiahu, China, where people were brewing a mix of rice, honey, and fruit long before anyone had invented writing. McGovern has a phrase for what he believes alcohol did for early human groups. He calls it a possible social lubricant, something that helps strangers trust each other just enough to trade, to cooperate, to build communities larger than a single family could manage alone. There is one more site that makes this idea almost impossible to ignore. At Göbekli Tepe, in modern-day Turkey, archaeologists uncovered massive carved stone vats, some large enough to hold over 100 liters of liquid, dating back roughly 11,000 years. Chemical residue found inside them points to fermentation. Göbekli Tepe wasn't a village. It wasn't a farm. It was an enormous ceremonial site built by hunter-gatherers who hadn't domesticated a single crop yet, And they were hauling multi-ton stones across open ground and gathering in the thousands to raise them. So why gather in the thousands before farming, before permanent homes, before a single written word existed anywhere on Earth? One theory researchers keep returning to is this: shared drinking may have been part of what pulled strangers together in the first place, and part of what kept them cooperating long enough to build something that massive. Which brings you to the real twist hiding underneath all of this. You probably assume alcohol loosens social bonds simply because it lowers inhibition, makes people looser, sillier, easier to talk to. That part is true enough, but the deeper mechanism might be biological, not just behavioral. When you drink, your body releases endorphins, the same class of chemicals responsible for the warm, easy feeling you get after a long hug or a good laugh with close friends. A study led by Robin Dunbar, an evolutionary psychologist at Oxford, found that moderate alcohol consumption in social settings triggered this same endorphin response, and that people who released more of it during drinking reported feeling closer to whoever they were sitting with. In other words, the drink itself may be tricking your brain into feeling a bond it hasn't actually earned yet. Your ancestors weren't only getting drunk together around that vat at Gobekli Tepe. Their brains may have been mimicking the chemistry of old friendship, priming a room full of near strangers to trust each other faster than biology would normally allow. That's not a flaw in the system. That may be exactly what the system was built to do. There's a second layer to this story, one written directly into your genes. In 2014, a researcher named Matthew Carrigan, working with a team studying primate DNA, traced a single genetic mutation back roughly 10 million years, right around the time your ancestors would have started regularly eating fermented fruit off the forest floor. The mutation altered an enzyme called ADH4, found in the lining of the throat and stomach, and made it 40 times more efficient at breaking down alcohol. Before that mutation, ethanol was mildly toxic to your ancestors in any real quantity. After it, their bodies could process it efficiently enough to use it as a real calorie source, without it slowing them down or putting them at risk. The primates without the mutation stuck to unripe fruit and safer food. The ones with it could feast on the overripe, fermenting windfall nobody else wanted and walk away steady. Every modern human alive today carries the descendant of that mutation, which means your capacity to drink and even your body's specific reaction to it was shaped by a genetic accident, tested and kept for 10 million years, long before a single glass had ever been raised in a toast. So here is what this means for you tonight, at whatever table you end up sitting at. When you pour a drink and hand one to someone else, when a group raises glasses together before a meal, you are repeating something that has almost nothing to do with modern culture and almost everything to do with an 11,000-year-old instinct to build trust quickly, in a world where trust used to be the difference between surviving the season and not. The smell that once told a hungry primate exactly where the calories were hiding is the same neural pathway lighting up when you catch the scent of wine drifting across a room. The impulse that had strangers hauling stone across open ground to build a monument around a shared vat of fermented grain is the same impulse quietly pulling a group of co-workers toward a bar after a long week. You didn't invent the toast, you inherited it gene by gene, scent by scent, all